Hi. I have this little remote device so that I'm not leaning forward doing this when I turn it on, but it's not working. So hello, I'm Dr. Lynette Louise, the button pusher, also known as the brain broad. You know that though if you've come to my channel. I just want to remind you I'd love you to subscribe and spread this information around. We just recently did, or I recently did, a 4-part series on sexual difference and the issues related to special needs and focusing on autism because it was Autism Awareness Month. And my daughter runs a sexual diversity site. So even though that was primarily meant to be about LGBTQ, LMXOP type people, we thought it was appropriate under the circumstances to add a 4-part series on autism. Well, I got a question. And the question was actually removed by YouTube, which I'm really disappointed in because though I approve of YouTube being careful and removing things that look like they're attempting to be titillating, I really wanted to go through it line by line and address the issues that were raised in the questions. So now I'm going to have to be more general and go by memory because I really only read it quickly and then thought this needs to be a video. So let's start, and I'll do my best to recap at least the basic issues that were raised by the question. Oh, and before I get into it, the questions getting answered is something that I do on the Autism channel. So if you want to ask me questions here, I'm going to answer them. And if it looks like it should be a video, I'll make a video. But if you want to be more anonymous and just sort of a passive learner and sit back and watch and see me answer questions about autism from parents that are dealing with issues with autism, then go to the Autism channel and watch Letters to Lynette. That's its purpose. I just answer letters. That's all I do, and it's a very well-received series. If you don't know how to get to the Autism channel, use your Google and just ask. Okay, so we don't have time for that. We have to get into this. I want to keep it short. So here's the thing. I did a video, if you haven't seen it already, on sort of the sexual evolution of somebody who's got autism. And I talked about the various sensory issues and how there might be a fear of, say, unwanted hair showing up, while at the same time there might be this wonderful response in the sensory system. So sex for this person is more intense, more taste-oriented, more smell-oriented, just bigger and more addictive in some ways. And in sharing this information, I also shared information about my son and how you handle sort of the good parts of the sexual release, like having an orgasm is very good for resetting your brain, and preventing a meltdown can be done with a little masturbation. So it's very plain talk, very clear. I told some stories from my children's lives because then I don't need permission from my clients. My kids said I could. So, or some of them did, some of them didn't. So here's the crux of the question. Because I talked so plainly, the person assumed, or seemed to assume, that I actually had a hand in it, ching, in my children's learning how to masturbate and that sort of thing. And I suppose, because the English wasn't perfect and there were some very clear questions there, that YouTube just assumed that this was a negative comment looking for titillation. I want to start there because, in fact, this is a common problem. I do have parents all the time asking me, what do I do with this? My son has reached full puberty, is very motivated for something, and doesn't know how to connect with people, and doesn't know how to get a relationship going, and doesn't know how to have sex, and doesn't know all these things, and yet is driven. Well, let's roll this back a little. Number one, did I have a hand in it? Not in that way, no. That's not necessary. I did, though, have a very clear presence and discuss these things very easily, and realize that it wasn't so much sex that had to be taught as the handling of the urges and the way to be socially acceptable with this need. So let's look at it's a spectrum, autism, and I had children on the spectrum at every location of the spectrum, from the bottom to the top. So, my children that were at risk of going out and having sex with women and or young ladies and not being careful, or young men, and not being careful, not caring about their feelings, not listening to their responses if they maybe said no at the last minute. This was my issue with it. So with those boys, I was, I'm like, here, I've got a hairbrush upside down, and I'm like, this is how you put on a condom. And they're like, Mom! And I'm like, no, you're going to watch this, or you're not going to leave this room. Actually, we were sitting in the car. It was the only place for privacy. But, so I showed them how, and I said, I'm going to keep boxes of condoms in the shower, and you need to practice this all the time. If it isn't comfortable and easy for you, you won't do it. And I made sure they always had them. And so there was that part of it, because they knew they wouldn't care if they got a girl pregnant. They wouldn't care. They wouldn't think out that far yet. I was still going to work with them. But in the meantime, I had to deal with the possibility of a problem. Worry about things like them being rapists or abusers because they don't have a sense of, this gentler caring hadn't quite emerged yet. So I took care of it at one end and then taught them over and over again and stayed involved as much as they would let me in every relationship, every connection, every place they went that where they were meeting women. And to that end, I actually traveled around with them and went resort to resort, so they kind of had to let me in on stuff because they couldn't just hide it inside of a gang or a group that already existed. So these are the high-functioning guys, right? And they're learning just like everybody else is learning, and I'm shaping, just like your neurotypical guys, I'm shaping how they then move into the world, and successful or not, right? That's my goal, is to make sure they're kind, beautiful men. But then the lower functioning guys are the ones that I was talking about more, and the ones that this question was about. So that we've dealt with that a little bit. Now let's get very quickly into something very specific. So what happens is when they're lower functioning or slower moving at their rate of change, however you want to feel comfortable hearing me say it, what happens is puberty hits full on. And for many, I would say, I'm going to just make up a stat. This isn't a real stat. Let's say 75% of people that are slower functioning, autistic adults, male, they get this puberty hit them hard, and they have not learned how to be socially appropriate. So now their body is giving them spontaneous erections. They do, even though many people ask me this question, like, how do they learn about ejaculation? Their body knows. Most of these people just start having wet dreams like all your kids do. And if you're not paying attention to it, expecting normal, you might not see that there were wet dream stains in the sheets or whatever. They start having these spontaneous erections, just like your neurotypical kids do, but they don't hide it. They accidentally discover in their sleep, oh, if I undulate into the sheet or into the mattress, I can facilitate this feeling. So nature really, biology really sets you up to learn how to ejaculate. But it doesn't help the autistic person learn when, where, etc. And here's what I want to say. Your lesson to your child is not how to ejaculate, generally speaking. There are kids that do have this issue, and then that's a hormone thing usually. So we're going to leave that aside because that's usually an exception. That's not the issue. It's please don't do that humping thing on the couch in front of all this company. Please don't, push yourself up against somebody because you have a driver. So you have, as in, a drive to do it. God, all the puns, right? So your job is to teach the where, the when, the privacy, while at the same time helping them cope with this intense sensory thing. And I start with just privacy. That's all I worry about. It's like, oh, sorry, you do that in private. That's perfectly fine. Can I help you with that? Do you need a pillow? Do you need, whatever you need? Do you need music? Oh, just stay away? Okay. So you teach privacy. That's all you want to teach. You don't want to teach judgment. You don't want to be offended. You don't want to say, hey, that's not the right way to masturbate. You don't want any of that. You just want to teach privacy. And privacy in this beginning place can be, all right, family sees you do that, but nobody else can see it. Because it may be so intense for them that it's too much to ask to say, you're not allowed to do that in front of anybody. That'll create a kind of desperation, it'll turn into violence, etc. So you just start with, sort of figure, okay, who's going to be non-judgmental? Okay, we won't deal with that yet. Okay, and then you say, okay, that's a private thing. That's a private thing. When you're done, come on out. You'll feel great. We all do it. That whole thing. And even if they're lower functioning, they understand most of what you're saying. And if they don't understand the words, they understand the attitude. So just like you do with your animals, your babies, when you're talking to yourself, you do it with an attitude. Like, I'm giving you joy and happiness, and I'm doing that on purpose. I don't want this to be a heavy weight. It doesn't have to be. It's a big job, but it doesn't have to be a heavy weight. Okay? So they feel your attitude. So go ahead and be informative and say, I do that too, my way. Girls do it different, but I do it in private. It's a private thing. And then you build from there and you go, it makes people uncomfortable. You give tools. If you go pee, it'll help it go away. So you start thinking, wow, what will help him? Where is he stuck? What's the issue? I caution you, don't get, I've seen this quite a bit with families where they get stuck on trying to get the child to do it in the right way, right, rather than undulating on a bed or whatever works for them. And though that information is useful in case they want to, remember this is an autistic person with sensory issues. Their hand may not feel good on their penis. There isn't a right way. There's just a right way to be private. And don't worry about the rest of it. They will figure this out if they're feeling so intense. If you're not seeing any evidence of it, there may be a hormone issue. It's pretty common. So the man or woman that sent me this question began by sort of saying, how do you do it? We're worried about it. Did you show them? Did you do it for them? Can you do it for them? Is it okay? And don't laugh, because lots of parents ask this question. It's a great quandary. If you haven't done the teaching all along the way, as you taught going to the bathroom and not dropping your pants all the way, or those sorts of things. So you may be in a bind and trying to figure it out. And what I can say is you have to follow the laws and the social requirements of your culture. You have to be, wherever you are in the world, you have to be moral to the extent that you're moral in your environment. Because your child lives in that environment, whether you think they do or not. And so anything you do, the minute that you go against your society in that way and do something so private and sneaky or illegal, you create a problem for yourself and your child where you have to worry about, don't tell anybody, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. It's going to unfold ugly. It's going to backfire. Don't do that. Live in the culture you're in. In this American culture, for example, you can't even hire them someone until they're 18, right? But once that happens, and you're seeing that they're having a real issue trying to connect with people and it's affecting them wrong, like affecting their self-esteem, affecting their ability to be comfortable around girls, or boys, affecting any of that, then you might consider finding somebody who's a sex therapist or who is just a lovely person. And I even know someone who hired or actually bought a wife for their autistic man. So there's all kinds of choices out there, and I'm not going to judge any of them, but I want you to stay inside the framework of your own society, your own culture, and your own legal system and work from there. Even if it feels like that's not enough freedom, you really have to, or this is going to be a big problem. Your child will figure this out if you're comfortable and you just teach to the problems as they show up. Okay? So privacy is the first thing you teach. Then how to be private is very detailed. They're very literal, you know. Like I was telling the story, my son didn't think of sounds as being an issue in privacy, but they are. Running up and smelling someone because that gives you a titillated feeling. Well, that isn't allowed. So now you teach about, you need permission to approach someone for a smell or a hug or a touch. But you don't start with getting the person to stop everything, because then you do yourself harm and you do your child harm. You prevent them from growing. Another pun. You prevent them from growing into this beautiful, comfortable person who understands the ins and outs of it all. Okay, I have to leave now. If you have a direct question, and if I did not answer your question because, like I said, YouTube removed it, please email me, and I will try to do a better job, a more specific job. My email is crazytosane@gmail.com. Go to my website, LynetteLouise.com, and watch lots of video here. Please like and subscribe. And here I go, pushing the button. Oh, the last pun.